pleasant day to you, sir. We are the group 12 and we will be presenting to you the chapter 12 of this book titled The Gendered Body. My name is Dennise Jem Espedido and I will be sharing the first part of this chapter. So in this book, it was stated that our body is our own possession and in which we have full control of. Of course, except when it comes to the biological matters. In terms of sexuality, it is something that is rarely openly talked about, and our bodies have been subjected or associated with myth, taboo, and ignorance. So people have developed certain stereotypes wherein men and women should act like this and that stuff. But for the past few decades, a lot of significant changes have been made. People have gone through new surgical procedures, birth controls, and even the rise of internet where it raises awareness to other gender groups to open up and be accepted by other people. However, of course, they still receive some backlash from others who think that it is different from the usual gender norms. Our ideals of beauty and attractiveness is deeply gendered. It is something that we could still observe in today's age where women have a lot more beauty standards compared to men. Partly because maybe because men are the ones who created it in the first place. So women are so conscious about their body, in particular with their breast, because it is considered as the symbol of femininity. And it is also said that men's preference in this matter depends on their social status. So when a man is a breadwinner and the woman stays at home, he prefers her to have larger breasts because it emphasizes their biological differences. Whereas if both of them are working, the woman could have smaller ones, and this actually reduces the distinction between men and women. When it comes to the Muslim culture, women are seen to be like innately seductive, so they have to practice what they call burda, wherein they have to cover their body because it was thought that men are easily tempted. However, in some groups, for example, is the Igorot tribe, which I am a part of, in their early years, women's breasts are actually out in the open, and it wasn't really a big deal because they don't perceive it as something sexual. In the US, or basically most parts of the world, we could observe this what Naomi Wolf called beauty myth. It is the unrealistic or unreachable ideal feminine beauty. Because of these ideals, women became so drawn to cosmetics, skin cares, diets, surgeries, and so much more. I think we could use the Korean beauty standard as an example where women are considered beautiful if they are tall, if they're skinny, if they're fair, and so much more. Because of the influence of media, women started to want to have the model-like body where they starve themselves up just to achieve it. Because of the body shamers, they are afraid to get fat or gain weight, even though there's really nothing wrong with it, as long as it doesn't affect their health in a bad way. Because of all of this, women experience insecurities and as well as eating disorders, which sometimes lead to anorexia. In today's generation, the beauty standards, even though they are still present, they are actually now changing in a positive way. People are now trying to normalize things such as gaining weight, having textured skin, darker skin tone, having stretch marks, and such. Before I end this, I just want to add that men also go through this. Men also experience these standards or ideals. But the good thing is, people now are also speaking out in terms of the toxic masculinity. Because it doesn't have to be like that. Having soft features, characteristics, or personality doesn't actually make them less of a man. Having a standard is fine, but making it unrealistic or unreachable is actually dangerous. We have to understand the diversity that we have, hence why a certain way might not be suitable for others. It is great to improve yourself, but you have to keep in mind to keep a reality check for you to not get lost on all those standards that the society is telling you.
Good day. I am Jamie Maclang and I will share the contents in Chapter 12 covering sexual bodily transformation, transgenderism, and gender sexual socialization. Sexual bodily transformation, transgenderism. Because gender role expectations constrain people, they seek to expand this by changing their behavior to challenge gender stereotypes. On one end, women will wear an item of man-tailored clothing and downplay femininity to give them the air of confidence. Transvestites regularly dress in the garb of the opposite sex, disrupting the equation of biological sex and social gender by playing with gender, the socially and cultural prescribed adornments and dress. Some people, though, feel that their biological sex doesn't match their sense of gender identity, and they feel persistent discomfort and feeling trapped inside their bodies. So most people that feel this are transgender people. Because of this, they have the urge to change their biological sex to match their gender identity. The author of this book stated that transgender people offer living proof that the social construction of gender and sexuality is more than metaphoric. Let's talk about the sexuality. So, the friendship and love have become feminized. Sexuality is masculinized. The masculinization of sex include the pursuit of leisure for its own sake, increased attention to orgasm, multiplication of sexual partners, and the universal interest in sexual experimentation. And there has been also the separation of sexual behavior from love. This is partly due to the sexual revolution's promise of greater sexual freedom with fewer physical consequences. Sex, on the other hand, was invariably seen as bad for women, unhealthy and immoral, whereas it was tolerated or even encouraged for men. The double standard persists today, perhaps less in what we do. Men still stand to gain status and women to lose status from sexual experience. Boys are taught to try to get sex. Girls are taught strategies to foil the boys' attempt. The sexual double standard itself is a product of gender inequality, sexism, and the unequal distribution of power in our society based on gender. Gender inequality is reinforced by the way we assume that men are more sexual than women and that men will always try to escalate sexual encounters to prove their manhood. With such a view, a sex becomes a contest and not a means of connection. So when thinking about sex, men and women are often thinking about different things. Men to think about sex more often than we do. So over 54% of men tend to think about sex compared to 19% of women based on the National Opinion Research Center or NORC. So given men's and women's different sexual mentalities, it is not surprising that we develop different sexualities as evidences in our attitudes and behaviors. For one thing, women's inclusions of their boyfriend or husband in their fantasies indicates that women's sexuality often requires an emotional connection to be fully activated. Now let's talk about the gender sexual socialization. So each gender is seeking to express different feelings for different reasons with different repertoire. So psychologist Charlene has been studying adolescent sexual encounters for more than a decade. So she found out that more men than women reported that they had engaged in unwanted sexual intercourse. And more men than women said they engaged in sexual intercourse because they did not want to appear to be homosexual, shy, afraid, or unmasculine. Peer pressure was a factor of 10.9%, but only 6.0% of women.
Human sexuality refers to people's sexual interest and in attraction to others. It is the capacity to have erotic or sexual feelings and experiences. Sexuality differs from biological sex, in that sexuality refers to the capacity for sexual feelings and attraction, while biological sex refers to how one's anatomy, physiology, hormones, and genetics are classified, typically as male, female, or intersex. Sexuality is also separate from gender identity, which is a person's sense of their own gender or sociocultural classification, man, woman, or another gender, based on their biological sex. It is also distinct from, although it shapes, sexual orientation, or one's emotional and sexual attraction to a particular sex or gender. Sexuality may be experienced and expressed in a variety of ways, including thoughts, fantasies, desires, beliefs, attitudes, values, behaviors, practices, roles, and relationships. These manifest themselves not only in biological, physical, and emotional ways, but also in sociocultural ways, which have to do with the effects of human society and culture on one's sexuality. Some researchers believe that sexual behavior is determined by genetics. However, others assert that it is largely molded by the environment. Human sexuality impacts and is impacted by cultural, political, legal, and philosophical aspects of life. Sexuality across cultures. According to Broad in 2003, throughout time and place, the vast majority of human beings have participated in sexual relationships. Each society, however, interprets sexuality and sexual activity in different ways. Human sexuality can be both understood as a part of social life and humans governed by implied rules of behavior and the status quo. The socio-cultural context of society, which includes all social and cultural factors, from politics and religion to the mass media, not only creates social norms, but also places major importance on conformity to these norms. Norms dictate what is considered to be acceptable behavior. What is considered normal or acceptable in terms of sexual behavior is based on the norms, mores, and values of the particular society. Different cultures vary in regards to norms, including how they understand and perceive sexuality, how they influence the artistic expression of sexual beauty, how they understand the relationship between gender and sexuality, and how they interpret or judge particular sexual behaviors, such as premarital sex, the age of sexual consent, homosexuality, masturbation, and etc. Societies that value monogamy, for example, are likely to oppose extramarital sex. Individuals are socialized to these mores and values, starting at a very young age, by the family, education system, peers, media, and religion. Sexuality throughout history. Sexuality has always been a vital part of the human existence. History shows an increase in the collective supervision of sexual behavior when agricultural societies emerged, most likely due to population increases and the growth of concentrated urban communities. This supervision placed more regulations on sexuality and sexual behaviors. with the advent of patriarchal societies, gender roles around sexuality became much more stringent, and sexual norms began focusing on sexual possessiveness and the control of female sexuality. How males and females were allowed and expected to express their sexuality became very different, with men having a great deal more sexual power and freedom. Different cultures, however, have established distinctive approaches to gender. Culture and religion. Most world religions have developed moral codes that have sought to guide people's sexual activities and practices. The influence of religion on sexuality is especially apparent in many countries today in the long debated issue of gay marriage. Some religions view sex as a sacred act between a man and a woman that should only be performed within marriage. Other religions view certain kinds of sex as shameful or sinful, or stress that sex should only be engaged for the purpose of procreation. Many religions emphasize control over one's sex drive and sexual desire, or dictate the times or conditions in which sexuality can be expressed. Whether or not sex before marriage, the use of birth control, polyamorous relationships, or abortion are deemed acceptable, is often a matter of religious belief. Sexuality and the media. Mass media in the form of television, magazines, movies, and music continues to shape what is deemed appropriate for normal sexuality, targeting everything from body image to products meant to enhance sex appeal. Media serves to perpetuate a number of social scripts about sexual relationships and the sexual roles of men and women, many of which have been shown to have both empowering and problematic effects on people, especially women's, developing sexual identities and sexual attitudes. Gender relations shape the world of men and women. What is considered masculine or feminine in society is important in order to understand our actions and behavior. HIV/AIDS is a major threat to millions of people all over the world, the vast majority in developing countries. The disease strikes hardest at the youths and the working population. It threatens to wipe out the productive force in many countries. The spreading of HIV/AIDS has a gender dimension where women are affected more seriously than men. Like in parts of sub-Saharan Africa, girls and young women are several times more likely to be infected than their male counterparts in the same age group. Now the spreading takes place at a higher rate among women in comparison to men. I argue that this has to do with the different gender roles possessed by men and women, the notion of what is supposed to be masculine and feminine. It is important to consider this aspect when investigating the issue of HIV/AIDS spreading. The gender dichotomies can be viewed in a sexual sphere. Women are often characterized as either good or bad. The sexual behavior decides which of these roles the woman takes sides with, and her sexual conduct is judged by men. This limits and deprives her of her power and control within sexual relationships. The male orgasm becomes the given conclusion to intercourse, which further stresses the necessity of condom use, according to Travers and Bennett. These circumstances further enlighten the unequal relationship between men and women in the gender system, which were considered so deeply embedded in society that they become a social norm. Some phenomena are so culturally locked to the domain of women, as household tasks or childcare, that this is considered something natural and normal. Heterosexuality is constructed through male perception and becomes the notion of vaginal penetration. Travers and Bennett also said that women become the passive receivers of male sexuality and the men's sexual attention. A lot of research has been made concerning the situation of urban women and their ways of making a decent living and how to avoid male dominance. Childbearing and circumcision in relation to HIV/AIDS is also something widely discussed. Why should HIV/AIDS be viewed as a gender issue? Gender norms create how men and women think and behave, and they are deeply rooted in the cultural world we live in. This affects the behavior and comprehension of reproduction, sexuality, sexual behavior, and HIV risk. The gender space of HIV/AIDS is now widely recognized. AIDS is a short version of acquired immune deficiency syndrome, a disease caused by the virus called HIV, human immunodeficiency virus. The virus weakens the immune system and the infected person will suffer from diseases normally less harmful. Eventually, the patient dies. The HIV virus enters the body fluids and is transmitted through unprotected sexual intercourse, the sharing of syringes with an infected person, or by blood transfusions that contains infected blood. It is also possible to be infected through birth or breastfeeding. About 75% of all infections worldwide are due to sexual transmission, and about 75% of these cases are caused by heterosexual encounters. During heterosexual intercourse, women are at the higher risk of infection in comparison to men because the vagina or anus has larger areas of vulnerable exposed skin. The virus has also easier to survive in these areas than on the surface of the penis, and there are more copies of the virus in the semen than in the vaginal fluids or anus. Many things contribute to the complex situation of the connection HIV/AIDS and the women. It is not solely the gender dimension who is important but other factors as well. As some studies have shown, women who are abused by their partners were much more likely to get HIV in comparison to women who lived in peaceful relationships. Many different aspects of the issue must be taken into consideration: class and social vulnerability as well as gender. AIDS is a devastating problem. The absolute majority of HIV victims live in the developing world, and it threatens to undermine the economic growth when the working population diminishes. More women than men are infected. Especially young women and girls are at risk. The major problem, as I can see it, is that women are discriminated and pushed away from economic sphere. The gender norms are strong and prevail, so women are reduced to household duties and are kept away from activities that could generate income to her and her family. The gender dichotomies prevent women from an economic independent life. She would threaten men in their domain and challenge both the nation of the masculine and the feminine. First, she would intrude the male sphere and challenge the image of the man as the master of the household. As many studies have shown, women contribute to the family income in a number of ways that the man or husband is always considered to be the head of the household. This is connected to the masculine picture. To let women work and earn money, and more important, gain power in the household, would be devastating to the masculine ego, according to Sibler-Schmidt in 2004. Women work, but are marginalized and held back by the strong image of the male breadwinner. But women can also support themselves in a way that breaks the traditional gendered pattern. Women who migrate from their homes in the rural areas and start working in the cities goes beyond the gendered rules set by society, but they still fall victim to it. The dichotomy of a woman as either a Madonna or a whore pictures these women as the latter, and thus puts them in a disadvantageous position towards society. They can be the subject of rumors, which one of the studies has shown. These images are strong, and these women are a serious threat to the male dominance. It is also very important to view this in the context of HIV spreading. Because women are counteracted in their effort of earning an own income, they are often forced to gain money in other channels that the men use. This often results in some sort of exchange of sexual services, but should not categorically be seen as prostitution. In much of the research conducted within the subject, it has shown that many girls and women rely on men to earn a living. They might have a sugar daddy that provides young women with necessities, while the woman provides him with sex. This is a result from the peripheral role of the woman, which undermines the effort of having an own income, but also from the masculine idea of having many girlfriends as a proof of his masculinity. So these notions boost each other and put both the men and women in danger of infection.
Good day everyone, I am Juliana Rengalota and today I will be discussing with you the topic about closing the sexual gap, just saying no, campus convergence, the hookup culture, and under that is adult sexual convergence, and lastly, homosexuality as gender conformity. So, to summarize each topic, I will just be giving you statements to give you an idea what is the topic all about. So let's start. First is closing the sexual gap. The first statement, I guess sex was originally to produce another body, then I guess it was for love. Nowadays it's just for feeling good, was the way one 15-year-old boy summed up the shift. So, as I see it these days, this 15-year-old boy's statement is partially true, but not entirely true because I believe that there is still a lot of young people who are saving their virginity until the right time. In some cases, I've noticed in today's generation, young people believe that giving one another satisfaction is what they call love. Possibly because they are still immature individuals who are easily get attracted and can't help themselves. For me, it could be because we don't have proper education about this subject in our country, and because teenagers are naturally exploratory, they are drawn into this type of situation or thinking. So, next statement, it would appear that sex education enables people to make better sexual decisions and encourages more responsibility, not less. I believe in this statement because proper sex education will lead to proper thinking, which will serve as an eye opener for people to think carefully before making a decision because it may result in too much responsibility if ever happens. It necessitates a number of considerations, such as whether or not you are prepared to face the responsibility, as well as whether or not you are financially stable. Because if it results in pregnancy, it is no longer just you who must think about, but another life as well. So it is critical to have sex education before making out. So, for the last statement in this topic, as Lillian Rubin writes, in the brief span of one generation from the 1940s to 1960s, we went from mothers who believed their virginity was their most prized possession to the daughters for whom it was a burden. Virginity was no longer a treasure to be safeguarded, now it was a problem to be solved. I am aware that many diversionized young girls exist nowadays, resulting in an increase in the number of teenage pregnancies, and I believe that this is a problem that we must address. But we cannot say that virginity is no longer a treasure to be guarded because still is for some. Nowadays, I believe that one of the most important things to avoid early pregnancy is parental or guardian guidance as well as proper sex education from experts because I believe that good communication is one of the keys. So moving on to the next topic, which is just saying no. In my opinion, Having sex is completely out of control, especially in this generation, because young people nowadays are very explorative out of confusion, and they create things that they believe are perfectly fine. They are also so secretive that we have no way of knowing if they are doing something wrong. Because of this, I believe the phrase just say no to sex is no longer applicable in today's generation. For me, it for me what is required is proper education in order to make the right decisions. And one of the most important things to practice is safe sex in order to avoid becoming pregnant at young age. So let's move on to another topic, which is campus convergence, the hookup culture. So, first statement, no longer do students meet and mate with the intention of marrying. On campus, hooking up is the norm. I agree with this statement because I've heard a lot of stories like this, and they're doing it because they're looking for sexual pleasure at that time, with no intention of falling in love with or even attracted to the person they're making out with. According to what I know, it is not hooking up as the popular term today, but rather one night stand if I'm not mistaken. Uh, Next statement, perhaps the problem is not the sex, but rather the gender that is, not the consensual sexual activity between two consenting near adults, but rather the gender and inequality that accompanies it. In this section, it discusses women's loss of modesty, chastity, or even capitulation to male sexual standards, stating that women, they counsel, must remember the message that their grandmothers may have once told them, which is men want only one thing. As a result, women who yearn for commitment and marriage must relearn how to say no. Actually, this is correct because women think this way in order to understand men's true intention toward them. Gender inequality exists in this case because I believe that women bear a disproportionate share of the burden associated with having sex, and its strategy of requesting commitment first matters. So, under that, we will discuss the topic adult sexual convergence. So, first statement, it's different from what it used to be when women were supposed to hold out until they get married. There's pressure now on both men and women to lose their virginity, is how one 29-year-old man put it. But for a man, it's a sign of manhood, and for a woman, there's still some loss of value. Actually, this is right because as I observe, it is different thing when man loses their virginity and when woman loses their virginity, because if a man get the virginized, it is something to be proud of, while if woman get the virginized, it is a shame. So next, I paid for a wonderful evening, commend one college man, and I was entitled to sex for my effort. This attitude is extremely harmful because it leads to ineffective decision making. After all, I believe that sexual intercourse is truly sacred and should not be given lightly in order to satisfy oneself, and it should never be served solely for the sake of reward. So the last statement, now the problems are sex addiction, a relatively new term that makes having a lot of sex a problem, and non-relational sex, which makes pursuing sexual pleasure for its own sake also a problem. Being addicted to sex is one of the most serious issues that our country is currently dealing with. As a result of this addiction, Many rape cases occur, which is very disturbing and makes our surroundings very unsafe, leading us to be paranoid in every situation because it could happen anytime, anywhere. So, moving on to the last topic is homosexuality as gender conformity. So, the first statement, but such common sense thinking has one deep logical flaw. It assumes that the gender of your partner is more important and more decisive in your life than your own gender. Our gender, the selection of behaviors, attitudes, characteristics, and consumptions and assumptions that about what it means to be a man or a woman, is far more vital than the gender of those with whom we engage sexually. Gender identity is confirmed by sexual behavior, gay or straight. This isn't to say that common sense assumptions uh, haven't permeated popular discussions of homosexuality, particularly in advice books aimed at helping parents ensure that their children don't turn out wrong. Next statement, uh, if heterosexuality and homosexuality are so similar in that men and women express and confirm their gendered identities through sexual behavior, what then are the big differences between heterosexuals and homosexuals aside, of course, from the gender of the partner? Gay relationships, on the other hand, are more egalitarian. When we ask who initiates, for example, uh, gay men and lesbians report identical rates, which are far more egalitarian than rates reported by married or cohabiting heterosexual couples. Uh, because homosexuals' identities are defined by their sexuality and because their sexuality is not procreative, gay men and lesbians have been more sexually adventurous, particularly with non-penetrative sex. So for the last statement, male heterosexual often spend a significant amount of time and energy in masculine display so that no one could possibly get the wrong impression about them. According to one study, many heterosexual men claim to have sex to prove they weren't gay. Because most of our common misconceptions about homosexuality revolve around gender inversion, heterosexual compensatory behaviors frequently involve exaggerated versions of gender stereotypic behaviors. So, that's it for today. Thank you for listening.